Okay, I'm doing this webinar because I was specifically asked to make ARV as simple as possible and to show how people could do it on their own. Uh, so that's what this is all about. And so let's go forward and make it simple. First, let's discuss what happens in linear time. Um, the remote viewing session comes first, and when you remote view the target that you will see um, or experience, what you're doing is remote viewing what you will experience during your feedback session. Now, remote viewing is just a capability of consciousness that allows access to information from distant places and distant times. There's lots of different approaches that people take to do this, but basically, um, it's a proven capability. It's been used for millennia, without that name, of course. And our focus here in ARV is with gathering information from distant times. So the remote viewing session is when you're remote viewing. It's the target that you will see and experience during your feedback session. That's sometime in the future here. The feedback session is when you, in fact, do experience that and exchange, if you will, the information with the remote viewer. All of that is done in ways we don't understand, but that's what consciousness does. So the protocol starts with the remote viewer describing and sketching a picture he'll see or she'll see at feedback time. Now, okay, so what? What if you want to apply this to, say, investing in various financial instruments or wagering on sporting events? This is where the third aspect of ARV comes in, and that's the analysis judging session. This is where you make basically an action-oriented judgment. And that judgment is based on a yes or no question because we're doing binary ARV. There are other forms you can do, but we're focusing, and we really suggest you begin focusing with binary ARV. And so here, the prediction is going to be ultimately an answer to a yes-no question. Now, how do we relate that to the feedback target? Well, there are two possible targets actually, and that's the key word here, possible targets. One is associated with yes, the other is associated with no. So the actual target shown during the feedback session is, and that's the one the remote viewer will experience, that will always be associated with what actually happens. If the actual answer is yes, they'll see the target associated with the yes. If the answer is no, they'll see the target associated with no. That is inviolate. So that always happens. And that's how you can use it because you know that here, if there's a good match with a yes, you can then act on the yes answer before the outcome is actually known. Now, let me give another perspective. Once you accept that precognition, the ability to get this information from the future is real, I really think it is valuable to take in the fact that precognition actually begins with the feedback session. So you're involved in purposeful precognition now, and this begins when you know the truth. You're going to be looking at a target, and I'm going to tell you what I suggest as targets in a moment. You are going to be looking at a target during your feedback session. Your task now as the remote viewer is specifically to describe and sketch your XXXX feedback target. The XXXX is simply, we use a 6-digit number. Some people use letters and numbers mixed together. It doesn't matter. This is associated with the target. In fact, some people call this the target reference number. We happen to use the word coordinate. But this is the thing which is also going to be shown to you during your feedback session. Now, what is this feedback target? It could be an object. We recommend, just simply because you're going to be doing hopefully a lot of these, this is something which you want to get into for the long term. And if so, we suggest what's called a photo site. Now, a photo site refers to the particular location at the particular time a photo was taken. So we're going to be using photos, but we refer to them as photo sites because your consciousness, the remote viewer's consciousness, and also at feedback time, the remote viewer's consciousness, is expected to move to that site at the time the photo was taken and to describe and or sketch what can be readily verified or inferred from the photo. So first impressions are very important, and they can take the form of visuals, color, shapes, dimensions, sound, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, emotions. It's basically what the remote viewer will put down on their transcript, what they will report when they remote view this target, is anything that their normal senses can report to the conscious mind. So the first impressions will come in, but then there'll be additional information which will come in, all which will come in terms of these kinds of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, emotions. So that's the remote viewer's job, to do just that. Now, the judge's job, which may be an independent judge, or it may in fact be the same person, but certainly wearing a different hat, involves this judgment of the two possible photosite targets. That's what that person's job is, and that's what that person does. Now, the target is this feedback photosite, and it's amazing how often people will give stories about going someplace else. They described something that they saw, yes, the following day, but it wasn't the target. That's not your job. The job is to describe and sketch the feedback photosite that you'll see during this session, which is when precognition begins. Now, the whole idea then is really very simple. Once you understand the feedback session is when you see the truth, you see a picture that's associated with yes or no, and the remote viewer's job is to simply describe that picture. And the judge's job is to match the transcript with one of two possible choices. Now, finally, let's just get into a little bit more how you might apply this idea on your own. It all comes together with the analysis and judging, because that's where the judge ultimately will make a yes/no decision based on how well the transcripts, the particular transcript, the one transcript from the remote viewer, matches either the yes photo site or the no photo site. Now, doing this is really comes down to putting two photo sites into many envelopes. Now I've italicized envelopes because many people will actually do this on the computer. But one way or another, you need to hide from the remote viewer. That's why you put them into the envelope. Two photo sites. So here's example. One which is associated with yes, one which is associated with no. Doesn't matter how you do that, because they're going to be hidden. These, of course, should be as different as possible so the judge can distinguish what the remote viewer is seeing based on the feedback time. Um, so you want to make these as different as possible. I think this is a pretty good example of that. And then that's put in an envelope. And you want many of these, and then you basically will choose them randomly at the beginning of your task. We actually will be doing this in Las Vegas at what we call our App Fest, in exactly this way, which we don't use computers. We've put envelopes in these envelopes. We put these photo sites in the envelopes, and we choose them randomly, actually after the people do the transcript. So it's very clear that the only way you can get the answer is to look at the feedback session. And then during the feedback session, we show the appropriate picture. That's ARV. Um, if you have some questions or anything like that, Steve, you can ask them now.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by putting two photo sites into many envelopes.
No, two
You
go into one envelope each. So you'll end off with many envelopes, each of which will have two pictures in it, this being the example of one envelope.
okay? I don't know why I'm still not clear on that.
Well, the reason you're doing that is so that you can randomly pick one and nobody will have the slightest idea of which the two pictures are. Then the judge, so after the remote viewing is done, the judge, so you now have the remote viewing transcript in front of you. The judge now opens up the envelope and judges the transcript against these two pictures. And if
Okay,
there's really a good match to the yes, he predicts the answer is yes and can act on it. Obviously, if it's a good match to no, then you take the point of view that the only way the remote viewer could have gotten a good match was by looking at the feedback picture. That was her job. And sometimes it's a pass. So there really are three choices: yes, no, and pass. So if there's not really a good match, or sometimes you might get enough elements of both that you don't feel comfortable, you pass. And over time, that's just what you'll learn.
okay.
Okay, so why don't I stop